Hello, I'm Michael Lubier and I'll present my website project in Dynamic Web Application course. I'll first present quickly an overview of the website so that you guys have something to relate to when I'm explaining inside the code and different parts. So I made a random recipe website that uses a recipe API, which is called the meal DB. And I'm using the API by generating random recipes. Because the main purpose of the website is finding new ways to, new recipes to cook, and to get inspiration, cooking routine, change the routine, but to do it in a way that is more fun. How the website works is that you have this surprise me button, which is the same as in the navigation bar, but the home web page shows you instantly and easily what the website does. So you can quickly just randomize a recipe, or you can click in the navigation bar, and then this creates it fetches a random recipe from the whole database and shows the ingredients, the instruction in the picture, and you have a button where if you click it just regenerates a new recipe, and this can help someone find something new to cook during the week, or inspiration, thinking I would like to eat like this week, or make this dessert. And then there's other functions in the website also. If you don't want to just completely random get a recipe, you can randomize a recipe from a category. So from here you can randomize a chicken recipe, for example. Then you have a back button to randomize a different recipe. If you want to eat pasta, you can get a random pasta recipe. And then about page, which is just the text explaining where it began, the history of the website, why it was made. And in here I talk as if I was a team. We aim to inspire. But the about page is mainly just information. And then there's a contact page, which is the form that sends us, or the owner of the website, it sends a message. A user just needs a name, last name, email, and then a message. And then there's checking for errors in here also. So there's the basic HTML5 error checking, then with emails. But then I also used regular expressions, so you can't have something that's not a name to being a name. This is from the regular expressions, and I'll show all the code and how I did it afterwards. And then the text box I also had in the CSS that you can only resize vertically, so you can't resize horizontally and change the view, like what the website looks like. What would not make sense to. So home page, recipe gallery to randomize from a different category. Surprise me to randomize from any category. About, and then contact page. And I always have a title bar, a navigation bar, and a content, and then a footer on every page. And my JavaScript is used for, with the API, is used for the category gallery to fetch and generate, and also the surprise me category. And talking about the database, the API I'm using, it's a completely free API that just has a lot of meals, a lot of recipes with pictures and ingredients and instructions. But this free API is not at all professional, or I wouldn't use it in a real website, since it's one of the problem it has, if I'm talking about in general, also using a third-party API. The web designer has to make sure to know what is inside the API. If there's no pictures or something that's against the law inside the API. But then also looking at the quality. If you want a website that follows a standard, has good quality, and for example this API wouldn't be good for this, because in the recipes they have pictures that look really bad sometimes, and they don't have a standard for recipes. Sometimes they use American cups and tablespoons, and sometimes they use grams, so nothing is really standardized. So this API was made for cool projects, as it says here, and then mostly for education, I would say. So it was perfect for this exercise. And in terms of API, there's a lot of it is about fetching different recipes or even a random meal, which is what I used a lot in categories. If I go to the code, I divided the code into folders with CSS, HTML, and images, JavaScript, and then the index.html is inside the whole project document. So the index.html is the home page at the same time. It's where the website starts. And I am also using a reset CSS and then my own CSS file, and then this in every HTML page. And as I said earlier, the same kind of the header, the navigation bar, a main section, a footer in every web page also. And so, for example, the about page was just text, and then the contact page was the mainly text, and then the form, and then here you can see the regular expressions, and then the message that's shown if something is wrong. And I didn't use regex for emails, so I'm then still using the HTML5 checking, which is a bit bad because you can have an email with no .com or something. But I thought for this project it really doesn't matter. I could have added the regex, but I really don't think it matters. And then both the gallery and the surprise page, where I use JavaScript, that's where I have the script it is used. So the gallery page uses the gallery.js, and surprise page uses surprise.js. And where the content is generated is shown here. In the category page, my API fetch content appears here, and in the surprise page the same way appears in where the comment is. And then if I go to the JavaScript itself, let's start with a surprise page. So when the surprise page, when someone goes into the page, that when the DOM content loaded, the event listener, when the page is loaded, this happens, fetch random recipe. And this random recipe function, this is what fetches from the API. So this is a function in the API has the random recipe fetch. And then with this data, with the data that I get, I then use this function display random recipe which displays the instructions, the measurements, the ingredients in the picture inside this little container, the div, and then I have two different places inside this container. And for this I will get element by ID for the surprise text, which is the text for the recipe, the ingredients and the measurements. So I find element by ID, which is surprise text, and surprise image, which is those two. Surprise text goes here and surprise image changes inside here. Source and alt text. And after finding those get element by ID, then I fill in the ingredients and the measurements, and then I display into the inner HTML this variable surprise text and the surprise image. I fill in, and here I know this image I could have done the same as for the text, which is using a div, but I had done this a long time ago, one of the first thing I did. So instead I had the image itself with an ID, and what I get from the API, I just change the source and the alternative text from the API. I know I could have had a div with the same ID instead, and in the JavaScript creating the image, just like I'm doing with the text. But I don't think that my files passed all the validators anyway. I think it's not a problem and it works. But I could easily do a div and then change the inner HTML and create a picture from there. But as I said, it was one of the first thing I did. And when I did this HTML like frame with the containers, and then I wanted my pictures to be exactly where it is, for example, and the text to be exactly there. So I had my frame, and then I changed the source and the alt text from the API. It works. So the surprise page, and then the gallery page, which everything happens inside this, everything is generated into the gallery container, the ID. In the same way as the surprise page, when the page is loaded, it's an event listener. When the page is loaded, it starts this function. It fetches categories, which it has the API itself has a way to fetch categories, and then this data I use it in this function to display the categories down here. And to display the categories, that will happen, I find the element by ID, the container, and then I create a grid with grid items for each element of each categories. For my categories, for each category, creating a grid item. And I also create a on-click. If you click on the pictures, it starts fetching a random recipe from this category. And then other than that, the grid that append child into the category div, which is the whole container of the grid container, and then append child the grid itself into the grid gallery container. But right now, what's important is when you click on the pictures, it starts this function on click. This function, what it does, so I'm fetching a random recipe from that category, which is not something that was a function inside the API. So I had to do it myself, and this was the hardest part to figure out. So I thought for my website I really needed this get gallery category, so someone can generate a chicken meal or a fish meal or dessert without having to just click on surprise me all the time. So I wanted this. The way I did it is that I filter by the category that was chosen here, and then with this data I use mat random to randomize the length of the array of all the meals of this category, and I get a meal, an index, and then I get the meal from that has this index, and then I use fetch recipe details with the meal of this index. Fetch recipe details is down here, which is then look up, searches for exactly this meal ID, this meal of this meal ID in the database, and then gets the recipe data. And then afterwards I display this recipe in the same gallery container area on the website. So I get the ingredients, the measurements, and then the picture, and then I also added a back button so that you can go back to categories to go back to the grid. And I use a grid inner HTML. My dogs are barking. And this back button has an on-click event. But when you click on it, I want to go back to the grid, which to do this I had to clear the grid and then redo everything from the beginning. Here, fetch categories. And I did this because without doing this, if I was here on the recipe gallery and I click here, but then if I went back, it was just adding the categories under the recipe down here. Then you went back and somewhere else, and then you had many recipes and then the grid. So that's why I had to clear the container first before going back to redoing everything, reload the categories. So, and I only have one image in my website, so I didn't use different image scales for different sizes of screen, because my whole website, I made it, so after the reset, I made the whole website have exactly what kind of text size that I wanted. And everything is in RAM, and everything, like I said about the picture, everything is flex, display, and auto height, and auto almost anywhere where I could. So my website is really responsive, and scales itself. For example, this could be like a mobile screen. And I'll show more into the CSS, but everything scales image size. So having different image size for different size of screens is maybe better for maybe saving space, or maybe not saving space to not have a really big picture, just become smaller but still weigh a lot, have a lot of pixels. But in my case, I really didn't find a reason to have different scales for every picture, because I only have one picture and every other picture is from the API. And I don't know if you can really have different sizes if you have something from an API. And then everything scales. The navigation bar becomes from a row to a column when it becomes small screens, like tablets, kind of tablets, and then phone screens. Then even this content of the surprise page also is 2 columns and becomes 1 column at a certain threshold, which is down here. Yes, CSS, responsive design. When my screen becomes smaller than 768 pixels, then things change to columns and sizes and margins. And this here, the grid, I had to play around with the min-max 9 rem. I had to play around for the gallery here. So at first, if I went small size like this, I only had one big picture, then one big picture, so 1 column. It would be a bit bad on a phone, scroll down really far down. So by putting 9 rem instead of even 10, and it made it to be 2 columns instead. When it changes here at this threshold, it becomes smaller scales. It was a bit difficult since all this whole grid is from JavaScript and the API, but it worked with the CSS. Okay, well, 22 minutes, 23 minutes, maybe that's it for my presentation. So the CSS, my HTML, my JavaScript, and I explained how I did it, and why I did with the pictures and the scaling and the interactivity of little animations. No, I didn't show specifically the CSS. After using my reset, then I kind of redid my sizes and margins. I tried to make it as easy as possible, and that, for example, my links and my navigation links. My navigation links inherit the colors of the usual links. So all links are black text, but then my navigation links has also to look like a button. They have a border radius and a background color. Everything is flex. Otherwise, I try to inherit as much as possible, put everything in rem and percentages. And I have one button here, which I made this button look the same as the navigation bar. Fake buttons, because all of this is just text links made to look like a button, and this is also like a fake button. The only real button is the one made here by the JavaScript. I made it look the same as everything else. And I also tested the website with the Wave. None of the pages have any errors. I tried to test the contrast as much as possible with changing the color here. And it was good. I know I don't have many colors, but at least I made sure that it looks neutral and the right contrast. Yeah, so that's it for me. Video getting long. Thank you for listening.